Please be seated. Stories and examples about greatness and wisdom in humanity, they're found in many religions and cultures. So a theology blog I follow recently shared a poem by Rumi on this idea. Rumi was a Sufi mystic and poet in the 13th century. And now I am reminded of Rumi's poem when we hear this gospel text today, and the disciples missing the point and wanting to be first. Rumi shares a tale about a young man seeking wisdom. A certain young man was asking around, "I need to find a wise person. I have a problem." A bystander said, "There's no one with intelligence in our town except that man over there playing with the children, the one riding the stick horse. He has keen, fiery insight and vast dignity like the night sky, but he conceals it in the madness of child's play." The young seeker, baffled, asked the wise man why he conceals his intelligence. The man answers, "The people here want to put me in charge. They want me to judge, magistrate, and interpret all the text. The knowing that I have doesn't want that. It wants to enjoy itself. I am a plantation of sugar cane, and at the same time, I'm eating the sweetness." So here Rumi sees a deep truth about the countercultural wisdom of God. Truly wise and gifted people do not seek power, fame, or even recognition. These individuals are the ones working to welcome the child, whoever that is in their context. Now Jesus is back on the road with his disciples. He shares first another startling passion prediction. The Gospel of Mark has 3 predictions of his suffering, death, and resurrection in chapters 8, 9, and 10, and this is the second. Last week we heard the first passion prediction, and Peter understood and confessed Jesus the Messiah, but then he misunderstands and is rebuked by Jesus. So despite hearing this brutal truth again, the disciples are still confused. And perhaps even more troubling, they're afraid to ask Jesus about it. Mark's gospel captures this succinctly, saying they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. What are they afraid to ask? What do his predictions of his death and rising mean? Can they comprehend it? Are they afraid to ask because they're afraid maybe they are the ones who will betray Jesus? I can see myself easily in the disciples' place. We are unsure, perhaps overwhelmed by what we don't understand. Sometimes we might perceive there's less resistance to responding in silence instead of asking questions and seeking clarity. Remember how Peter began to correct Jesus and the rebuke that he received last week. "Get behind me, Satan." So I get the urge to stay quiet and keep listening. In our confusion and discomfort, we then focus on ourselves, on our greatness, on how we measure up, and on how we compare to others. When the group arrives in Capernaum, friends welcome Jesus and the disciples into their home. The dust from the road and travel are washed from their feet. They are fed. I can imagine them being humbled to receive such a warm welcome. But at the same time, receiving such hospitality might make them feel very valued and important. But Jesus doesn't scold them for misunderstanding. He does not shame them for their pride. Jesus gathers them close, sits down, and begins to teach. He says something that turns the world's values upside down. Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Jesus doesn't stop there. He continues to teach. He even uses an object lesson. He brings a child into their midst. He cradles and hugs the child, a little one from the household where they're staying, and says, "Whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." He makes a point of repeating the word welcome again and again. Welcome. In first century Judea, the realities of childhood were different. There's an argument that childhood as we knew it didn't even exist in a full way until the Industrial Revolution. Infant mortality was high. Surviving to adulthood was more precarious. Children only had a small amount of status and were often overlooked. But even then, like today, children were mostly dependent and vulnerable to the world around them. So Jesus teaches the disciples about the characteristics of the reign of God, taking a child and telling the disciples to welcome such as these. Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, "The test of the morality of a society is what it does for its children." End quote. To welcome a child is to serve those with less or even nothing to offer. To be a servant to all is to be a servant to those who the world considers least important, those who are vulnerable, those on the margins, those who are often forgotten. Now, it's easy to cradle a quiet, clean child. So I wonder if this child that Jesus embraced and brought into the room with the disciples was noisy, messy, or ill. It might not have been so easy to welcome and serve. Yet Jesus, in this moment, he speaks plainly. To serve in God's kingdom is to care for the least, those who cannot repay you, and those who have no status or power to give you in return. In our context, greatness is often measured by how high we climb, our economic status and wealth, and the social ease that we move through the world. But here is Jesus saying that God's kingdom, the way to be great, it's to become a servant. Those words aren't easy. The disciples struggled with them. And if we're honest, we struggle with them too. Our capitalistic world is still absolutely celebrating power, status, and wealth. We're bombarded with messages telling us to look out for ourselves, strive for greatness, climb to the top. But Jesus calls us to a different way, a deeply countercultural way. In Rooney's story, the wise man knew that the world wanted to pull him into positions of power and authority, but he didn't seek those things. He played with the children, enjoying the sweetness of life, and was not consumed by striving. I see Jesus in this conception of wisdom, inviting us to let go of our striving to be first, to be the greatest, and to embrace instead the simplicity and joy of serving others, being there for others in our community, being there for others here in the pews. The way of the cross is the way of servitude. And while it may be costly at times, it's also the path to life. Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." When we give of ourselves, put others first, and serve to the cast-off and invisible of our world, we discover the fullness of life that God has for us. May we follow in the footsteps of Jesus, the one who came not to be served, but to serve. The child, not the king. The child is the one who reveals how God sees that order. May we welcome the least among us, knowing that in doing so, we are welcoming Christ. Will you seek to serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? I will, with God's help. May we find in the way of the cross, the way of life.